The blood on her dress wasn't hers, at least. Not all of it. I was cleaning my rifle on the porch when she stumbled out of the pine forest like a ghost materializing from the Montana wilderness. Her wedding dress, once white as fresh snow, was now torn and stained crimson. Bare feet, cut and bleeding, left dark prints on my cabin steps. "Help me," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper before collapsing at my door. "My name is Samuel Creek, and I've lived alone in these mountains for 12 years. Built this cabin with my own hands after the war took everything I held dear. I chose solitude, chose the silence of the wilderness over the noise of civilization. But as I knelt beside this broken woman, feeling for a pulse in her delicate wrist, I knew my peaceful existence was about to end. She was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair matted with pine needles and dirt. Her face, even in unconsciousness, carried the kind of terror that settles deep in a person's bones. I've seen that look before in the war, in the eyes of soldiers who'd witnessed unspeakable things. I carried her inside, laid her on my bed, and began examining her injuries. Cuts on her arms, bruises around her neck shaped like fingerprints, and a gash on her forehead that had bled considerably. As I cleaned her wounds with whiskey and torn cloth, she stirred. "Don't," she whispered, flinching away from my touch. Her eyes, green as spring meadows, were wide with panic. "Easy now," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You're safe. Name's Samuel. What happened to you?" She tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her body. "He'll find me. He always finds me." "Who will? My husband." The word came out like poison on her tongue. Marcus Thornfield. I'd heard that name before. Thornfield owned the largest ranch in the valley below thousands of acres, hundreds of cattle, and enough influence to buy silence from anyone who might oppose him. Rich, powerful, and by all accounts, ruthless. "I'm Alina," she continued, pulling the torn fabric of her dress tighter around herself. I ran, finally ran. The way she said it told me everything. This wasn't the first time she'd tried to escape, and it wouldn't be the last time he'd come looking. I helped her drink some water, watched as color slowly returned to her pale cheeks. Outside, the October wind howled through the pines, carrying the promise of an early winter. Snow would come soon, sealing us in until spring thaw. "How long have you been running?" I asked. 3 days, maybe 4. I lost track. She touched the bruises on her neck unconsciously. The wedding was supposed to be ... a celebration. Instead, it became my prison sentence. As night fell, I prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Alina ate slowly, as if food were a luxury she'd forgotten. Between bites, her story emerged in fragments. Marcus Thornfield had courted her father's debt, then offered marriage as payment. Her father, desperate and dying, had agreed. The wedding night had revealed Marcus's true nature: violent, controlling, possessive. When she'd tried to leave the morning after, he'd beaten her unconscious. She'd been planning her escape ever since. "He has men everywhere," she said, staring into the fire. "Riders who answer only to him. They'll search every town, every homestead." "This cabin's not on any map," I replied. "Built it in a place most folks would never think to look." She looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. I knew what she saw: a man approaching 40, weathered by sun and hardship, with scars that told stories I preferred not to share. My hair, once black, now showed silver at the temples. My hands, calloused from years of solitary work. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. The question hung in the air between us. Why was I'd sworn off involvement in other people's troubles, learned that caring only led to loss. But something about Alina reminded me of who I used to be before the war burned the humanity out of me. "Because everyone deserves a chance to be free," I said finally. That night, I gave her my bed and made myself comfortable on the floor near the fireplace. But sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside whined through branches. The hoot of an owl, the distant howl of wolves, made me reach for my rifle. Around midnight, Alina cried out in her sleep, thrashing against invisible bonds. I woke her gently, and she sat up, tears streaming down her face. "The dreams," she whispered, "they're always the same. He finds me, drags me back, and this time she couldn't finish the sentence. "You're safe here," I told her, meaning it. More than I'd meant anything in years. But even as I said the words, I wondered if they were true. Marcus Thornfield wasn't the type of man to let his property disappear without consequence. And in the eyes of the law, such as it was in these parts, Alina was still his wife, his possession. I spent the rest of the night keeping watch, rifle across my knees, listening to the sounds of the forest. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, beyond my clearing, I knew riders were searching. It was only a matter of time before they found us. The horses appeared at dawn, their breath visible in the crisp morning air as they emerged from the tree line. 6 riders, all wearing the distinctive black hats of Thornfield's men. I recognized their leader, Jake Morrison, Thornfield's foreman, a man with dead eyes and a reputation for violence. I was already dressed and armed, having heard them coming from a mile away. Alina sat by the window, her face pale as parchment, as she watched the riders approach. "Samuel Creek," Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We know you're in there." I stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Morning, Morrison. You're a long way from the ranch." He dismounted, his 5 companions remaining on horseback, hands near their weapons. Morrison was a tall, lean man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, souvenir from a knife fight in Deadwood, or so the stories went. "Looking for something that belongs to Mr. Thornfield," he said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "His wife ran off during their wedding celebration. Figured you might have seen her." "Can't say I have." The lie came easily, a skill learned during darker times. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Matter of fact, I do mind." I shifted the rifle slightly, not threatening, but making my position clear. "This is my land, Morrison. You've got no authority here. Mr. Thornfield's authority extends pretty far in these parts." "Not this far." We stared at each other across 20 feet of cleared ground. Behind Morrison, his men grew restless, hands twitching near their gun belts. These weren't cowboys, they were hired guns, the kind of men who solved problems with bullets. "She's dangerous, Creek," Morrison said, changing tactics. "Killed a man in town before she ran. Stabbed him in the neck with a letter opener." I felt Alina flinch behind the cabin door, but kept my expression neutral. "That's so self-defense, most likely." Morrison continued with a cold smile, "But still murder in the eyes of the law. Mr. Thornfield's willing to overlook it, being his wife and all. But if someone were harboring her," he let the threat hang in the air. "Appreciate the warning," I said. "Now get off my land." Morrison remounted his horse, but didn't turn to leave. "You always were stubborn, Creek. Heard you. Used to be quite the soldier before you went crazy up here in the mountains." War's over, Morrison, is it? He smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. We'll be back, and next time, we might not be so polite. They rode off, but I knew they wouldn't go far. Morrison wasn't the type to give up easily, and Thornfield's money bought persistence as much as violence. I found Alina sitting on the floor beside my bed, knees drawn to her chest, shaking. "They'll never stop," she whispered. "He'll never let me go. Tell me about the man you killed." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. His name was Henry Walsh. He was Marcus's accountant. He tried to help me escape the first time, gave me money and a horse. When Marcus found out, she wrapped her arms tighter around herself. He made me watch while they beat Henry to death. Then he told everyone Henry had tried to assault me, that he'd died protecting my honor. "But you did kill someone. Marcus's brother Thomas." The words came out in a rush. "The night I escaped, he found me in the stable, said he was going to drag me back to Marcus, said I needed to learn my place. When he grabbed me, I had the letter opener in my hand I'd been using. It had cut the ropes on the saddle. I didn't mean to. But when he tried to force himself on me, I just ... She broke down completely then, sobs racking her small frame. I knelt beside her, uncertain how to offer comfort. It had been so long since I'd dealt with another person's pain. "You did what you had to do," I said finally. "Any man would have done the same to protect someone they cared about." She looked at me through her tears. "But I'm not a man. I'm just property that fought back." The truth of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. In the eyes of the law, she was guilty of murdering her husband's brother. Self-defense meant nothing when the victim was a man and the killer a woman, especially when that woman was married to the most powerful man in the territory. I helped her to her feet, made her sit at the table while I prepared breakfast. As I cooked, I found myself studying her face in the morning light streaming through the window. Despite everything she'd endured, there was strength there, a determination, that reminded me of soldiers I'd known who'd survived impossible odds. "We need supplies," I said, setting a plate before her. "Winter's coming, and if you're staying, we'll need enough food to last until spring. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm deciding." I sat across from her. "But I need to know you're committed to this. Running away again when things get difficult isn't an option. These mountains will kill you faster than Thornfield ever could." She met my eyes, and I saw something fierce burning there. "I won't run. I can't go back to that life." "Then we need to make you disappear completely. Alina Thornfield needs to die, and someone new needs to take her place." The idea had been forming since Morrison's visit. If Alina was going to survive, she needed a new identity, a new life. And I was probably the only person in 100 miles who could help her create one. "There's a trading post about 30 miles north," I continued, "run by a woman named Sarah Hendricks. She's discreet about her customers. We can get what we need there, including papers for your new identity." "What kind of papers?" "Birth certificate, marriage certificate, death certificate for your husband. Husband who died in a mining accident back east. You'll be a widow, which explains why you're alone." Alina stared at me. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. She'd seen something in my eyes, recognized the planning of a man who'd helped others disappear. I had done this before, during the war, helping escaped slaves reach Canada, helping deserters find new lives away from military justice. Once or twice, I admitted. That afternoon, I began teaching Alina how to survive in the wilderness, how to track animals, how to read weather patterns, how to move silently through the forest. If Morrison and his men returned, she needed to be able to disappear into the woods and survive until it was safe to return. She was a quick learner, her desperation making her focus absolute. As we worked together, I found myself admiring her resilience. Most people would have broken under the pressure of her situation, but Alina seemed to grow stronger with each challenge. As evening approached, we heard horses again. This time, there were more of them, at least a dozen riders moving through the forest below the cabin. They didn't approach directly, but I could see firelight flickering through the trees as they made camp. "They're waiting," Alina said, standing beside me on the porch. "Morrison's smart. He knows I won't leave the cabin undefended, and he knows you won't leave without me, so he's going to try to starve us out. How long can we hold out?" I considered our supplies. 2 weeks, maybe 3. If we're careful, and them, they've got supply lines. They can wait as long as they need to. Alina was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the distant fires. "I won't let you die for me, Samuel. That's not your choice to make." She turned to face me, her green eyes reflecting the last light of sunset. "Why are you doing this? Really?" The question had been haunting me since she'd collapsed on my doorstep. Why was I risking everything for a woman I barely knew? "I had a sister once," I said finally. "Mary. She married young, to a man who seemed decent enough. But he wasn't. He was ... like your husband. When she finally tried to leave him, he killed her. Made it look like an accident." Elena's hand found mine in the darkness. "I'm sorry. I wasn't there to help her. I was off playing soldier, thinking. I was fighting for something important. By the time I came home, she was dead and buried." I squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe I can't save Mary, but I can save you. And if it costs you your life, then at least I'll die for something that matters." That night, we took turns keeping watch. Around midnight, during Elena's shift, she woke me urgently. "Samuel," she whispered, "they're moving." Through the window, I could see dark shapes moving between the trees, silent as hunting wolves. Morrison had decided to end the standoff. His men were surrounding the cabin, cutting off any escape routes. "How many?" I whispered, checking my rifle. "I count 8, maybe 10. They left some at the camp." Smart. Morrison was keeping reserves while sending enough men to overwhelm us. In the distance, I could hear horses moving. They were positioning. Riders to chase us down if we somehow broke through their perimeter. "Alina," I said, gripping her shoulders, "remember what I taught you about the old mineshaft?" She nodded. The abandoned silver mine was 1/2 a mile through the forest, with tunnels that connected to a canyon on the far side of the mountain. If she could reach it, she could disappear completely. "Take the pack I prepared. Follow the stream bed until you reach the mine. Stay there until tomorrow night, then head north to Sarah's trading post. What about you? I'm going to buy you time." She grabbed my arm. "Samuel, no. We go together or not at all. Look at me." I forced her to meet my eyes. "I've been fighting other people's wars my whole life. This is the first one that actually matters to me. Let me fight it." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. I helped her into the heavy coat I'd given her, made sure she had the knife I'd sharpened for her protection. Outside, I could hear boots on gravel. They were closing in. "When you hear gunfire, run," I said. "Don't look back, don't hesitate, just run." I kissed her forehead, tasting salt from her tears, then moved to the window. The first shadow appeared at the edge of my clearing, rifle raised. I took careful aim and fired. The man dropped without a sound, but the gunshot shattered the nights. Silence. Immediately, muzzle flashes erupted from the forest as Morrison's men opened fire on the cabin. Bullets splintered wood, shattered windows, and filled the air with deadly lead. I heard Alina slip out the back door as I returned fire, picking my targets carefully. Years of military training took over him. Fire, move, reload, the rhythm of survival. Creak. Morrison's voice carried over the gunfire. Send her out, and this ends. I answered with another shot, aiming for the voice. A scream told me I'd found my mark. The battle settled into a deadly pattern. Morrison's men would advance. I'd drive them back. They'd regroup and try again. My advantage was the cabin's thick log walls and my familiarity with the terrain. Their advantage was numbers and time. As the night wore on, my ammunition dwindled. I'd started with 60 rounds and was down to less than 20. Outside, I could hear Morrison coordinating his men, adjusting their positions, tightening the noose. Around 4 a.m, they tried to burn me out. Flaming arrows landed on the roof, and I had to risk exposure to climb up and put out the fires before they spread. In those moments, bullets whistled past my head, close enough to feel the wind of their passage. That's when I saw him, a rider approaching from the north, moving fast through the forest. For a moment, my heart sank, thinking it was another of Thornfield's men, but as he got closer, I recognized the horse and rider. Doc Holliday, not the famous gunfighter, but Dr. James Holliday, the territory's traveling physician. A thin, consumptive man who'd been making rounds through these mountains for 20 years, treating anyone who needed help, regardless of their ability to pay. Morrison, Doc, called out as he rode into the clearing, seemingly oblivious to the gunfire. What in hell's name is going on here? The shooting stopped abruptly. Even Morrison's hired killers wouldn't shoot a doctor. Doc, you need to get out of here, Morrison called back. This is official business. Official business. My foot. Doc dismounted calmly, tying his horse to a tree. Samuel, Creek, you in there? I'm here, Doc, I called back. You hurt? Not yet. Doc Holliday was a small man with grey hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He wore the same black suit he'd worn for as long as I'd known him, patched and repatched, but always clean. He walked toward the cabin as if bullets weren't a concern. Morrison, I've got a letter here from Judge Harrison, Doc said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. Says there's to be no violence against Samuel Creek or anyone on his property pending a full investigation into the death of Thomas Thornfield. Morrison appeared at the edge of the forest, rifle still in hand. What investigation? Seems someone in town witnessed the whole thing. Says Thomas Thornfield tried to assault a woman, and she defended herself. Judge wants to hear her testimony before any arrests are made. I felt a surge of hope. Judge Harrison was one of the few honest men in the territory, and if he was taking an interest in Elena's case, it might change everything. That's interesting, Doc, Morrison said, but his voice carried a dangerous edge. Because I don't think there's any witness. I think you're bluffing. Doc smiled. Well, there's one way to find out. You can come to town and explain to Judge Harrison why you ignored his direct order. I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear your reasoning. The standoff stretched into uncomfortable silence. Morrison was calculating odds, weighing his loyalty to Thornfield against the potential consequences of defying a federal judge. This isn't over, Creek, Morrison finally called out. Mrs. Thornfield is still wanted for murder. Then she'll have her day in court, Doc replied before I could answer. That's how justice works in civilized places. I watched from the window as Morrison gestured to his men. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to withdraw. But I could see the promise in Morrison's eyes. This was just a temporary reprieve. Doc waited until the last rider had disappeared before approaching the cabin. Samuel, it's safe to come out. I emerged, rifles still in hand, and found Doc examining the bullet holes decorating my home. Appreciate the help, Doc, but I've got to ask, is there really a witness? Doc's smile was enigmatic. There is now. Mary Sullivan saw the whole thing. From her window above the dress shop. Funny thing about Mary, she's got a terrible memory most of the time, but she never forgets an injustice. And Judge Harrison, oh, he's very real and very interested in cleaning up the corruption in this territory. Word is, he's been looking for an excuse to investigate Marcus Thornfield's business practices. Hope began to bloom in my chest. Maybe Alina wouldn't have to spend the rest of her life hiding in the wilderness. Maybe she could have a real life. A free life. Where is she? Doc asked quietly. Safe. But she needs medical attention. Thornfield hurt her pretty badly. Doc nodded grimly. I've seen his handiwork before. There are other women, Samuel, other wives who've suffered at his hands. Maybe if Alina testifies, others will find the courage to speak up. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky, in shades of gold and crimson, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. Alina was alive and free, Morrison was retreating, and for the first time since this all began, it seemed possible that justice might actually prevail. But I'd learned long ago not to trust hope too readily. Men like Marcus Thornfield didn't give up easily, and this fight was far from over. Alina returned to the cabin 2 days later, guided by Doc Holliday. She looked stronger, more confident, like a woman who'd found her backbone in the wilderness. The haunted look in her green eyes had been replaced by something harder, more determined. Doc says there might be a way to end this without running, she said, sitting across from me at the small table I'd built years ago. There might be, but it means facing Thornfield in court, telling your story in front of the whole territory. Are you ready for that? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. During her time in the mine, she'd had plenty of opportunity to think, to weigh her options and their consequences. Tell me about the other women, she said, finally. Doc leaned forward. At least 6 that I know of, probably more. 3 previous wives who died under suspicious circumstances, 2 daughters of ranchers who Thornfield courted aggressively, and Sarah Hendricks, she's got scars from when Thornfield decided her trading post was charging too much for supplies. They'll testify. If they see you stand up first, yes. But Alina, you need to understand Thornfield has money, influence, and Judge Harrison is just one man. Even with witnesses, there's no guarantee of justice. Alina nodded slowly. What's the alternative? Spend the rest of my life hiding. Let him hurt other women because I was too afraid to fight back. I reached across the table and took her hand. Whatever you decide, I'll stand with you. But Doc's right, this is dangerous. Thornfield won't just roll over and accept defeat. Samuel, she said, squeezing my fingers. These past few days in the mine, I had time to think about everything. About who I was before I married Marcus. About who I became during those months of marriage, and about who I want to be now. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest that had sheltered her. I was Catherine Walsh, before I became Elena Thornfield. I was 22. I could read and write. I helped my father with his business ledgers. I had dreams of traveling, maybe teaching school somewhere. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. Marcus took all of that away. He made me into a possession, something to be displayed and controlled. But these mountains, this cabin, you've helped me remember who Catherine was. And I think it's time for Elena Thornfield to disappear forever. Doc smiled. So you'll testify. I'll testify. But not as Elena Thornfield. I'll testify as Catherine Walsh, a woman who was forced into marriage, who defended herself against assault, and who demands justice. The trial was set for the following month in Billings, the territorial capital. Judge Harrison had requested federal marshals to ensure Elena's safety. But we all knew Thornfield's reach extended far beyond our small corner of Montana. I spent the intervening weeks teaching Elena to shoot. Really shoot, not just handle a weapon for hunting. If Thornfield's men came for her again, she needed to be able to defend herself without relying on anyone else. She was a natural marksman, her small hands steady, her aim true. More importantly, she learned to shoot without hesitation, understanding that mercy was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You've changed," I told her one afternoon as we practiced behind the cabin. "So have you," she replied, reloading her pistol with practiced efficiency. "When I first stumbled onto your porch, you looked like a man who'd given up on the world. Now, ... Now," she smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it reached her eyes. "Now you look like a man who's found something worth fighting for." The night before we were due to leave for Billings, Elena and I sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Winter was coming, we could feel it in the air, see it in the way the trees were shedding their leaves. "Whatever happens at the trial," she said quietly, "I want you to know that these weeks with you have been the freest I've ever felt. Even with Morrison's men hunting you. Even with the constant fear. Especially then, because I wasn't just surviving, I was choosing to survive. There's a difference." I understood what she meant. For 12 years, I'd been existing in these mountains, hiding from a world that had shown me too much cruelty. But helping Elena had reminded me that sometimes the world was worth engaging with, worth fighting for. The trial lasted 3 days. Elena testified for 6 hours, describing in detail the abuse she'd suffered, the murder she'd witnessed, and the assault she'd defended herself against. Her voice never wavered, her story never changed. And by the end of her testimony, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. 5 other women testified after her, each telling their own story of Marcus Thornfield's violence. Sarah Hendricks showed the court her scars. Mary Sullivan testified about what she'd witnessed the night Elena escaped. Even some of Thornfield's own ranch hands testified about things they'd seen, atrocities they'd been forced to participate in. Thornfield's defense was predictable. Claimed Elena was mentally unstable, that the other women were lying for money, that his brother's death was premeditated murder. His lawyers painted him as a successful businessman being victimized by opportunistic women and federal overreach. But Judge Harrison wasn't buying it. When Thornfield himself took the stand, the judge's questioning was relentless, exposing contradiction after contradiction in his story. On the final day, as closing arguments were being presented, Thornfield's lawyer made one last desperate play. He argued that regardless of any abuse that may have occurred, Elena had committed murder and should face justice for that crime. Elena asked to address the court one final time. "Your Honor," she said, standing at the defendant's table with quiet, dignity, I did kill Thomas Thornfield. I've never denied that. But I want this court to understand something. I didn't kill him as Elena Thornfield, the frightened, beaten wife. I killed him as Catherine Walsh, a free woman defending herself against assault. She turned to face the packed courtroom. For months, I let Marcus Thornfield convince me that I was his property, that I had no rights, no voice, no worth beyond what he decided to give me. But in that stable, when his brother tried to continue what Marcus had started, something inside me remembered who I really was. Her voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. I am Catherine Walsh. I am not property. I will not be owned, controlled, or silenced. And if defending those truths makes me a murderer in the eyes of the law, then I'll accept that judgment. But I will not apologize for choosing freedom over submission. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Elena not guilty by reason of self-defense, and recommended that Marcus Thornfield be investigated for multiple crimes including murder, assault, and intimidation of witnesses. As we left the courthouse, Elena Catherine walked with her head high, surrounded by the women who had found courage in her example. Thornfield was nowhere to be seen, though I knew he'd already fled the territory with what remained of his loyal men. 6 months later, Catherine and I were married in a simple ceremony at the cabin, with Doc Holliday officiating and Sarah Hendricks serving as a witness. Catherine had decided to keep her new name rather than return to Walshy, said Catherine. Crick suited the woman she'd become in the mountains. We built a larger cabin that spring, with room for the school Catherine planned to start for the scattered children of the territory. She never lost the strength she'd found during those dark days, never stopped being the woman who'd chosen freedom over safety. As for me, I learned that solitude isn't the same as peace, and that sometimes the best way to heal old wounds is to help others heal theirs. Catherine didn't just save herself from Marcus Thornfield's, she saved me from a life of emptiness disguised as independence. Years later, when people asked Catherine about her past, she would tell them she'd been reborn in the Montana wilderness, that her real life began the day she collapsed on a stranger's porch and whispered, "Help me." And in a way, she was right. That woman in the blood-stained wedding dress had died in these mountains, and Catherine Creek had been born from her ashes stronger, fiercer, and finally, truly free. The wilderness that had once been my refuge became our home, and the silence I'd treasured became filled with laughter, conversation, and the sound of children learning their letters. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in facing death, but in choosing to truly live. And sometimes the best thing you can do for a stranger who collapses at your door is to help them remember who they really are.